Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
We are beginning a new book of Torah. You ended the book with Rabbi Sher last week. The book of Bereshit, the book of Genesis, ending with the story of Yosef, ending that story of Yosef. We studied it together, and Yosef brings Jacob down to Egypt, and Yosef is in power, and bringing his family to Egypt is the beginning of the story of enslavement, and how we begin then the book of Exodus, the book that is going to talk about our redemption from slavery. Now, for those of you who have been to the women's Passover events, a lot of this may be repetitive and familiar to you, but we come to Torah and read the Torah every year. So I'm eager for you to write down any points you want to be sure that get covered that you've learned with me in learning this text. We didn't look at it last time we were in the triennial because we looked at the commissioning of Moses at the burning bush. So it's been at least 6 years since we've studied this part of the Exodus story together. And like I said, I do teach the women of the Exodus. I have taught one of them each year for the women's Passover celebration. So we've studied this a couple of times together. Individual women, looking at it from their different perspectives. So it's a lot to me to imagine getting into an hour. So I will try to condense and because there's so much. It's one of my favorite parts of Torah. You're not supposed to have favorites as a rabbi. It's like having a favorite child, or a favorite burner on the stove, but we all do. Let's just admit it. We all do. Now that favorite child could change week to week. I understand that. But we do have, ones we favor. So I love this part of Torah. I think it's fabulous for us as women, us as humans, to really pay close attention to a story that we feel like we know super well, but there's always more. Every time I come back to it, there's more. But it is really an incredible story. So we're going to begin the book of Exodus together. We're going to begin the book of Shemot. So ve'ela Shemot b'nei Yisrael haba'im Mitzrayima et Yaakov ish uveito ba'u. So, and these are the names of the descendants of Israel that came to Egypt with Jacob, each coming with his household. And now we get all of these names. You get the 12 tribes, right? Reuben was the eldest of the children of Israel, with Shimeon and Levi the next in line. Okay, so we get all the namings of all of the names of all of the sons, all the men. The total number of persons that were of Jacob's issue came to 70, Joseph being already in Egypt. So we get Jacob, Joseph, the sons, Yisrael, Bnei Yisrael, the descendants of Israel, men, and names. Okay. That sets us up for what's coming next. Bnei Yisrael paru v'yishritzu v'yirbu, pru or vu, right? The commandment to be fruitful and multiply. They did that. And this word v'yishritzu, they swarmed. It's like insects. They are like really, really proliferating. Me'od, a lot. V'timalei ha'aretz otam, and they filled the earth. But remember, that's the commandment from Genesis. Pru or vu v'yimlu et ha'aretz. Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. So here we get the fulfilling of that mitzvah. Vayakam melech chadash al Mitzrayim asher lo yada et Yosef. And a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. All right, so now, why do we care whether the Pharaoh knows Joseph or not? Why do we care? Joseph was a hero. What else was Joseph? Jewish. Right? Joseph is a hero for Egypt, and he's a Jew. If the new Pharaoh doesn't know Joseph, what does that mean? Doesn't know about the Jews, right? And doesn't know about their connection, doesn't know about their, okay. So this is how, forgetting is how lots of things come to catastrophe, right? When we forget. There's many midrashim that say the Pharaoh hasn't changed, that Pharaoh chooses to not know anymore, right? Like lots of oppressors who choose not to know, right? They know, right? But they don't want to know, right? Okay. Vayomer, and he says to his people, look, the Israelite people are too numerous for us. Let us deal shrewdly with them so that they may not increase. Otherwise, in the event of war, they may join our enemies in fighting against us and rise from the ground. What does fear always lead to? Fear leads to hatred and to, genocide. I mean, it leads to murder. It leads to fill in the blank, right? So he becomes afraid that they are becoming too numerous. They could fight against him. And therefore, let us set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. And they built garrison cities for Pharaoh, Pitom veRamses. So this is why in Hebrew, with this expression in modern slang, when kids, or those of us who are 57, say mapitom, like what suddenly? And pitom means suddenly. So it's like mapitom. So often adults who are fed up with hearing mapitom answer pitom veRamses. There we go. All right. So they built the cities of Pitom and Ramses, probably storage cities. They did not build pyramids. These are probably the storage cities of Pitom and Ramses. So public building projects that were about storage of grain and other things like that. But the more they were oppressed, the more they increased and spread out, so that the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. And the Egyptians ruthlessly imposed upon the Israelites the various labors that they made them perform. Ruthlessly, they made life bitter for them with harsh labor at mortar and bricks and with all sorts of tasks in the field. So Egypt is all about building. What are, if we're not talking about the storage buildings and we're talking about the famous buildings of Egypt, what are those buildings about? What is Egypt's building projects about? Which is about what? Death. Egypt is about death. Egypt's building projects, all of those resources that are going into building are about death. So let's see how that plays out in our story. The king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives. Pay attention to the Hebrew. La miyaldot ha'ivriot. We don't know what this means exactly. It could have been stated clearly. Torah chooses not to do that. La miyaldot ha'ivriot can either mean the Hebrew midwives, meaning the midwives are Hebrew, or it can mean the Hebrew midwives, the midwives assigned to the Hebrews, right? You're the southern police force. It doesn't mean you're southern. It means you're serving in the south of the city, right? So it is left completely ambiguous. It can mean either one. So it's up to us, the reader, to decide, are these Hebrew midwives or are they the midwives assigned to the Hebrews? Possibly they are from another oppressed class, because that's the people you can trust to report back as another threatened population. It is less likely that we would expect Hebrew midwives to be ready to carry out the orders that Pharaoh is about to give. You all who have studied with me know how I prefer to interpret this, and that is that they are, in fact, not Hebrews. And we'll get to why I like that interpretation better. So Pharaoh, Melech Mitzrayim, the king of Egypt, talks to these midwives. Shem ha'achat Shifra, one is Shifra, v'shem ha'shenit Pu'ah. The second one is named Pu'ah. Aviva Zorenberg does a whole thing about their names. The Midrash has reams written about these names and what they mean. Vayomer, and says, B'yaldchen et ha'ivriot, when you attend, when you're birthing the Hebrews, and you see on the birthstones, im ben, if it's a son, who, right, then kill him. Ve'im bat, v'chaya. But if it's a girl, v'chaya, it will live. So why didn't Pharaoh just have soldiers come in and do this? They could be stationed soldiers, and all you have to do is wait for somebody to not come out of the house or start screaming or whatever, or wait for the midwives to be summoned and then send the soldiers in.
Given that the Israelites were basically slaves, why, before this, would the Egyptians send in midwives? In other words, if these were not Jewish...
Everyone has midwives.
Yes. But what I'm saying is, why would the Egyptians send it into slaves?
They don't.
So these were Jewish Israelites.
There could be Egyptian women whose job is to help with birthing. Just because you're a slave doesn't mean you don't have help birthing.
Yes, but I'm saying, but why would the ruling countries send in midwives?
We don't know if they're Egyptian or not. That you're saying that's an argument for them not being Egyptian. Is why would Egypt waste resources? If you're oppressing a class, one of the things you want to do is keep very careful records of births. Particularly if you own slaves, you might have Egyptian midwives whose job it is to keep track of every birth because your property. Essentially, right? Think of the Nazis. They kept very careful records. You think of slave owners in this country. They kept very careful records. And do you want the Hebrews keeping records about births, or do you want Egypt, right? So there's arguments to be made on both sides about who these women are, who these midwives are.
Didn't the Hebrew women go into the fields and have their babies?
You are now dealing with the midrash that we studied.
Okay.
Which is a fabulous midrash that I wish we had time to do because I taught 2 years. I taught 2 women's seders on that topic of that midrash. It's a fabulous midrash, but it is not Torah. Okay. So although we're going to see a little bit of that kind of imagery being used. All right. So let's go to... Yeah. So it seems easier to send in soldiers. So possibly when you're dealing with genocide, when you're dealing with, some kind of murderous policy as the oppressor, you start often in secret. Things start quietly. So it's possible Pharaoh is calling them and saying, make it look like an accident, or the baby was born dead, or right there, something happened, on the birthing stool, take care of it quietly, right? Like if you have soldiers with swords coming in and chopping off babies' heads, you're really putting yourself out there, right? And possibly Pharaoh is starting, like so many genocidal operations and agendas, it starts in secret and starts quietly.
I was struck as you were reading it by the Pharaoh, saying there's too many Jews and they're not going to be loyal to me. Just this very week, I saw the results of a poll that said like 38% of the people in the United States think that Jews are more loyal to Israel than to the United States. So that type of anti-Semitism is really old.
And very powerful, right? It generates a lot of fear. And people who want to capitalize on hate, capitalize on ignorance and fear.
And you'd never know that Jews were 0.02% of the world population.
Correct. 0.19% and falling.
And there are even countries with no Jews
with
this anti-Semitism.
Correct. All right. Now pay attention at verse 17. Vatir'ena hamiyaldot et ha'Elohim. But the midwives feared God. This is the good kind of fear. This is the fear that's about awe, right? Abraham is called a God-fearing person, right? After the Akedah. So this is the first time, though, that we get it as a verb. This is the first instance in the Torah of being in awe of that which is bigger, and it's the midwives. V'lo asu ka'asher diber alehen melech Mitzrayim. And they didn't do what was told to them to do by the king of Egypt. V'tachayena et hayeladim. They enlivened the children. right? They let them live. So Egypt is all about building, all about these huge projects that doesn't care about the individual, that doesn't care about life. It's all there to glorify this death and what happens after that. Not this life, not people, these projects about death. What do the midwives stand for? Life. Each individual child is a precious life, right? You start to see the message of Torah already in how this literary unit is put together, right? An incredibly beautiful, I think, use of the very terse Hebrew language that Torah is always using. All right. So they're all about v'tachyena. They allow these children to live, but it's less passive in Hebrew, right? They liven the children. They save them. They save their lives. The king gets word of this, that the birth rate has not gone down in the slave population. So he summons the midwives. What happens if Pharaoh is displeased and you are summoned before Pharaoh to explain yourself? It is not going to be good. So he says to them, Madua asiten hadavar hazeh? Why have you done this thing that you allowed the children to live? And we know he's talking about the boy children. Vatomrana. So vata'amarna, they said, who did the miyaldot, the midwives, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They are, your translation says, vigorous. What is the word in Hebrew? What's the word in Hebrew? Verse 19. Chayotena. They are beasts. Animals. Chaya, from the word life. They are, so the midwives in this tongue-in-cheek insult to Pharaoh, who is such a racist, that it works. They say, well, we just can't get there in time. They're like cattle. They're beasts. I remember like the biggest slur that someone said about Michelle Obama was that she was a beast, right? You use animal language. They're not even human. They're like subhuman. They're beasts, and they just like drop them in the field before we can get there, right? Before the midwife can get to them, vayaladu, they've given birth. They just drop them. We don't even know where it's happening. They just drop them. And God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and increased greatly. Another argument that these are not Hebrew midwives is that they so convincingly talk about these Hebrews as if they are a subhuman, right? I don't know that would go over as well if they themselves were Hebrews, right? I don't know how well that would sell. But they use Pharaoh's xenophobia and racism against him, and he's like, oh, okay, got it. I didn't know that, but that makes sense, right? Those beastly Hebrew women.
Do you think that this is woman to woman, that the women, the midwives, decided, I just can't kill a kid. I'm sorry. I just can't. And so then they told the Pharaoh, oh, they're like crazy people.
All right, let's hold that.
Yeah.
Let's hold that till we get to further on in the story. Yes.
Well, it also seems like these would not be Hebrew midwives, because why would the Pharaoh tell them when their job is to deliver babies? Why would the Pharaoh tell them to make sure that the boys didn't survive?
Because if they were Hebrews, they're still beholding to Pharaoh. They still report to Pharaoh.
Yeah.
If he says, y'all midwives need to be sure the next part of your job is to make sure the boys are dead.
Right. But it's unlikely if they were Hebrews that they would do that to their own.
Although, can you imagine Pharaoh thinking that they would dare defy him?
Jews killed Jews.
I mean, so oppressed people often move up the ranks by turning on a lot of them don't have a choice, right? If they're midwives, and everyone kind of agrees that Shifra and Puah are in charge of midwives. It's not just two midwives that he randomly called. He wouldn't know their names. Like the midwives in chief are summoned, and it's like, here's the new orders from the Nazis. Did Jews comply with the orders of the Nazis? You better believe they did. What was their choice? Like,
I'm sorry. One of the things I love about this class is I always see these things like new.
Good. Job security.
No, but what I was thinking of was the midwives. There's so much, since you're bringing in, the 20th century, this idea of righteous Christians, and it's almost like this whole population is about to suffer a collective punishment, and it gives me a new appreciation. This is kind of very similar. These are kind of righteous individuals who will suffer nonetheless, but are doing the right thing.
But remember, there's one little piece that's really important, which is, it says an Erev Rav left with Moshe. If you want out and you're with us, come with us. So there's a very big possibility that they were given they opted in and left and were not punished.
But isn't that the understanding that a large portion of them who were not part of the Jewish tribe, you could say, did opt in?
Yeah.
Isn't that what happened?
We hope.
Yeah.
I mean, I like to tell the story that way.
Yeah.
That we are not about purity of descendants from, Yisrael or Yaakov, that we are about anyone who's with this project, come join us. And
the more traditional way, I don't know, I think I was just brainwashed a little bit as a child, because I'm thinking of it as the righteous Jews and the bad Egyptians. And now, as you reflect on it, it's kind of people are people. There's good ones, bad ones. You know what I'm saying? And that even in the Exodus, it's not exclusively the Jews that are delivered. It's other populations. And it gives you a kind of more nuanced appreciation, and one, frankly, that's a little more believable than the story that I was brought up into.
Yes. And that's what we're here for, right? Is to look at Torah differently than how kind of the project in the past has been, or what it will be in the future. It's our job to look at it now and to bring our perspectives to it. Yes.
This is the beginning of a story that in a way ends with the last plague. Because just as Pharaoh said, kill the sons of the Israelites, that last plague, which is always so disturbing to us,
makes a lot more sense.
It makes a lot more sense. It's a literary device to say, you said kill all the Jews. Well, guess what? Here's a plague. It's going to kill the firstborn Egyptians.
Right. Males. You said kill the Hebrew males.
Right.
The plague is going to kill the firstborn Egyptian males. Okay. So we were studying with Yehuda Kurtzer in Jerusalem, and he had this wonderful, wonderful he said, and he quoted somebody, and I'm sorry, I was so tired then, and I'm so tired now, I can't remember. But he said that becoming Jewish is not the Kierkegaardian leap of faith. Kierkegaard, who talked about the leap of faith, he says it is a leap of solidarity, which I just got chill bumps saying it again. Right. So it's not a Kierkegaardian leap of faith to become Jewish. It is a leap of solidarity, that it's anyone who's with us, join us, and we're out of here, right? To build something else.
Two questions. One, this is the first time that I recall Israelites being called Hebrews. So that's one question. And the other is they did not perform. It said that they did not want to kill the babies because of fear of God. But if they were Egyptian, God was indeed the Pharaoh.
It says Elohim, gods, possibly. Is it Elohim, capital E, or is it Elohim, gods? Okay. That they had a different relationship to what that meant.
Okay, and so it wasn't the Pharaoh. Okay.
So some could argue, this proves they're Hebrews. But others could argue it didn't say Yud Hey Vav Hey, it said Elohim, which can be gods with a little g, but that they had a different relation. Even the rabbis are like, they had a deep relationship with the divine. But we can think about that the same way that there are Christian anti-Semites. There are Christians who risk their lives out of their relationship to their understanding of Christianity that mandated them to risk their lives. Okay.
Could you comment on why is it so that this is the first time Hebrew was used?
I'm gonna get over my feelings about the fact that I taught a whole shiur on this, George, about Ivrim, about Hebrews, but it was years ago, so I will deal with my feelings about it. So right. So we talked about over, to cross over. Avraham crosses over, and so possibly this is the folks who derive from the one who crosses over, which I love. One who crosses stuff, right? That's where the crosser overs, the Ivrim, the crossers overs, la'avor, to cross over. But probably it is from the Akkadian, I think it's Akkadian, Mesopotamian word apiru, and which is an oppressed class in Egypt that we have in the record. So probably we are related to that class. It can mean kind of an oppressed class in Egypt, apiru, and so probably Ivri, abiru is close to that. All right. I don't have my board, or I would show you how it, because Ivri, we're hearing the vet without the dagesh. A vet isn't v, it's b. So without the dagesh, you can't tell if that letter is a b or a v. So abiru, aber is the same as avor, Ivri.
Could you say that we are a people who crosses over?
I love that interpretation of it.
Yeah. You think about it all through history. It gives
that's right. We're the ones who cross over, who don't end up where we started, who leave, right, and start something else. Yeah, I love that. Okay. What is the greatest reward you can possibly imagine as a woman? God made for them what? Made of them what? Bayit, a house. They become the founders of their own dynasties, their own households, right? So as women, that is rare. All right. The Pharaoh charged all his people. Hang on to your. I'm hoping we'll have time. I don't know that we will, but this wonderful midrash about batim, about them, because actually God made of them households. So remember that, because the midrash takes it very literally. God made them houses. So just hold on to that. And Pharaoh commands all his people, saying, every boy that is born you shall throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. So the project failed. Doing it in secret failed. There wasn't enough cooperation. And so now Pharaoh moves, as these things do, to the next phase, and now it's out in the open. Now the project is wide open. Everybody is commanded to throw the firstborn, to throw the baby boys into the Nile. The Nile is the source of what for Egypt? Life. The Nile is the source of life. It waters all of the fields. It irrigates everything. It was worshipped as a god. It is the source of life. And they are to destroy life, right? That they don't want to be about, and turn the Nile into an agent of death. Now, Vayelech ish mi beit Levi vayikach et bat Levi. A guy from Levi, the tribe of Levi, takes a daughter from Levi, unnamed. Vatahar ha'isha vateled ben. She becomes pregnant and she bears a child. She is unnamed. She's called the woman. The ben is unnamed. And she sees it, kitov, that he is good. And she hides him for 3 months. You can imagine how terrifying that must be. In the slave population, where the edict from Pharaoh is to destroy the boys as soon as they're born, you throw them into the Nile, she hides him for 3 months. A baby, an infant. They cry a lot. They make a lot of noise. She's only able to hide him for 3 months. Then she realizes it's just impossible. So Lo yachla od hatzifenu. She could no longer hide him.
Did she dress him as a girl, perhaps?
We don't know. I don't think so, because the daughter of Pharaoh recognizes it as a boy. Vatikach lo, and she takes him, and what does she put him in? She puts him in a teva. Where's the only other place we see this word in Torah? Ha. She puts him in an ark and puts him in the water.
In answer to Bert, they're crawling at 3 months old, as you know, and they didn't have diapers, Pampers. And, pretty soon he's crawling around and he's showing his privates. So, of course, she could no longer keep him. I get it, totally.
She puts him in a teva. She puts him in an ark. She caulks it with bitumen and pitch, just like Noah is commanded to do. And she puts him into the reeds by the banks of the banks of the Nile. And his sister, unnamed, stations herself at a distance to learn what would befall him. So Miriam is watching. And then Vatered bat Paro l'rchotz, and here comes bat Paro, unnamed, to wash al hayor, at the Nile. V'na'aroteha holchot al yad hayor, and her maidens are walking along the Nile. Vatere et hateva, and she sees the teva, the basket, betoch hasuf, amidst the reeds. Vatishlach et amata vatikacheha, and she sends forth her slave girl, vatikacheha, and she kachs it. She takes it. She takes it. There's a beautiful midrash, beautiful midrash that says it's not her slave girl she sends. There's a word in Hebrew that is arm, from amah. She sends out her arm to the teva, and because she is acting on behalf of life, and because she is choosing to see and to bring in this teva, a miracle happens, and her arm is extended far enough to take and pull in the basket. You have to love it. You have to love the rabbis. Right? So they're saying it's not a slave girl. It's bat paro. Her heart is set on, just like Moses is going to turn aside to see the bush, that curiosity, that willingness to then go the next step. She sees, she's curious, she is willing to reach, and because she's willing to reach out her hand, a miracle happens, and it's made super long, and she draws in, she can take the basket, she can take Moshe from the water.
Question though, how does that jibe with the fact that the verb is tishlach? So sending. So what
she sends out her arm. Yes, that's what you do. You send out your hand to shake hands with somebody. You send it out.
There's probably another word for shaking hands or putting your arm out than tishlach.
It's not a stretch. See what I did there? Did you see what I did there?
Very punny.
In Hebrew, I don't think it's a stretch. In English, it might be, but she stretched out her arm that's not a stretch in Hebrew. She sent, it's a literal stretch. She sent out her arm. Okay. Anyway, I love that midrash. It's one of my favorites. There's so many great midrashim about this. So she kachs it. She takes it. Vatiftach, and she opens. Vatir ehu. And she sees him, et hayeled, the boy. Vehine na'ar, and behold, it's a youth. There is so many problems with this verse for the rabbis that there's reams of midrash written. She opens it and she sees him. That's all it has to say. Or she opens it and she sees et hayeled. She sees the boy, but she sees him. The boy is already problematic for the rabbis. They're like, Department of Redundancy Department. We don't have that in Torah. So they have all this midrash about what that means. And then, hine na'ar. Here's a young boy. Na'ar is usually used of like a teen. Remember we talked about Rebecca. She's a na'ara, but it says na'ar in the written. So there's a midrash that says, who does she see? She sees the Yeled, the boy. What does it mean in the first case? She sees him. Any guesses? She sees God. Kayla's like, what? So she sees him. She sees the divine presence. Et hayeled, in the boy, with the boy. V'hine na'ar, and behold, it is a na'ar. His voice is the voice of a teenager, right? That he's got this kind of, presence and voice about him that is far older than his being 3 months old. Okay, whatever. But, okay, go ahead.
I have very little to contribute. I just want to say this was my Torah portion.
Yay!
So this is very exciting for me.
So it's your bat mitzvah anniversary. Yay! All right, Bernstein. All right. V'hinei na'ar bocheh, and he's crying. Vatachmol alav. This is the point on which the entire fate of the Jewish people turns. This moment. Vatachmol alav. She has compassion for him. He cries, vatachmol alav. And it's not rachamim. It's a different word. It's a word about, it is about compassion, but it's also about, Zornberg looks at the etymology of the word and ties it to, a feeling of not wanting to waste. She understands the waste of life, the waste of possibility, the waste of future, and she's moved. She's moved enough that what does she do? She says, Miyaldeha Ivrim Zed. This must be from the Ivrim. How does she know that? Well, who puts a 3-month-old in a basket and sticks it in the Nile? Okay, so that would be terrible parenting. I mean, she even can't imagine somebody would do that unless you're fulfilling the commandment to put the baby in the Nile, just not the way exactly it was ordered. And she sees that he's 3 months old. So she sees that somebody has cared for this child. Somebody defied the edict and loved this boy enough to risk their own lives and the lives of their family to hide it for 3 months. Vatachmol alav. And she is moved. And what does she do? And she knows. We're told she knows. Torah's letting us know she knows. This is a Hebrew child. In this moment, what is she supposed to do? Or call the authorities. Even if she doesn't want to have anything to do with it, you call the authorities. There's a Hebrew boy here. That's what you do. The Pharaoh has ordered it. What does she say? There stands Miriam, a slave girl. So what does she say? Miriam says, and she's not named. Notice, nobody's named here. Nobody's named. Vatomer achoto. His sister says to the daughter of Pharaoh, shall I go and get you a Hebrew nurse to suckle the child for you? The third act of civil disobedience is a slave girl addressing royalty. That is completely unheard of, death penalty stuff. She addresses Bat Paro and chutzpadik that she is, chutzpanit that she is, she says, shall I fetch a Hebrew midwife? Thank you. Wet nurse to nurse him for you. What is Moshe's sister? She is the one who puts the idea in Bat Paro's head. He's yours. You'll need a wet nurse, and you're going to need a stroller and diapers, and there's so much great furniture down the road. There's this great guy so you need a crib. Okay, so she makes the suggestion. He's yours, and Bat Paro answers very simply. Right? Yeah. Right? L'chi, go. So the girl went and called who? Em Hayeled, the mother of the boy. Still no names. So Jody, this is going to go to your point. No names are being used here. This is on purpose. I cannot believe we get their names later. It's not like Torah doesn't know who these people are, right? It's not like their names were lost to us. We have who Torah wants to call them, right?
So why is there no names?
Hang on. We're going to get there. Vatomer la bat paro. And bat paro says to her, Hayelchi et hayeled hazev v'heini kehush. So bat paro says to the mother of the boy, take this child and nurse it for me, and I will pay your wages. So what happens here? We get the verb again. Vatikach ha'isha hayeled. And she takes the boy and nurses. All of this taking is only made possible by women. Women who are unnamed. Why, he asks Mark, and Jody said something earlier, why no names? Torah easily could have used the names. And I think, and many, it's not because of me, I've read many scholars who believe because this is about what women do. It's not a particular woman. It's not it's like because she's her, she does this. That they are unnamed because this is how women behave. That they are on the side of life. They are the birthers. They are the carers, the chemla. They are the ones that have chemla. They have compassion and mercy and take risks on behalf of that make no sense, that have to come from some other place. And they therefore are the ones on which so many things turn. And certainly on which our story is going to turn. So Yocheved, who put her son in the water, hoping there would be someone who would feel chemla, trusting that there would be chemla out there in someone, takes the ultimate risk, trusting her child to that hope. We get that in Bat Paro, who does not choose to see Moshe as other, who does not choose to see him as slave, as object, as, Pharaoh's order, and she chooses to respond to him as a yeled, as a boy, and she risks by taking him in. Miriam risks on his behalf by speaking, and Yocheved is now, it was just tragic to me on some level. All of you know I'm adopted, so I have so much stuff tied up with birth mother, adoptive mother, like the whole thing. It's very powerful for me that the birth mother who risks, what it means to give over a child, hoping someone will love it and save it and raise it. That's all she can hope for. She can't arrange it. She has to trust, she has to hope. And then Bat Paro is willing to see this as not an other, but as her own, and then pays the birth mother to nurse and care for her son. Pays her wages to do that, and we're going to see that what happens here, that he grows up. Vayigdal, Vayigdal, he grows up. When are babies weaned in the ancient world? What age? 3 or 4. When their permanent teeth, when their food-eating teeth start to come in, or can come in enough that they can eat, they are nursed until then. Imagine his birth mother nursing him and raising him until he's 4. And then what happens? He grows up. When the child grew up, she brought him to Bat Paro, who made him her son. Now what do we get? She named him Moshe, explaining, I drew him out of the water. Surely he had a name before that. And surely Bat Paro has a name, right? They don't matter. This is the moment, right, that it matters. What do the rabbis name her? What do the rabbis name Bat Paro? Batya, daughter of God. For them, in this act of defying Paro, she is adopted by the God of Pharaoh's enemy, Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. She becomes Batya. She betrays that system, she betrays that decree, and affirming Chemla and life, she takes a risk, and in doing so for the rabbis, she becomes Batya. She becomes the daughter of the enemy of Paro.
Oh, sorry. No, it was interesting because last week we were, talking about how women don't really play an important role.
We were?
Well, sort of.
We were talking about that last week?
You were.
Were we? I'm having a little chat with Rabbi Sher.
No, it was sort of, this is kind of a redemption for women's role.
But I'm bummed. See what you did there?
Yeah. No, but the other thing I wanted, so one of my kids is a classics major, so I get
a what?
He's a classics major.
Yeah.
So we talk a lot about Greek mythology, and it's really interesting. I suddenly realized that in Greek mythology, the story is always you sort of grow up a peasant, and then you discover at some point that your father is a god, and your journey is to find your godfather and claim who you are. In Moses, it's exactly the opposite. He grows up.
No.
You don't think so?
This is a classic hero tale.
No, but what I'm saying is he grows up thinking he's a prince and a big shot, and what he discovers is that he's a slave. It's the opposite direction.
In a way, but it is very much a classic hero tale. Okay. It's an infant whose life is immediately put in danger. He's miraculously saved. He does become son of the, daughter of the king. He, and then in escaping his fate, he becomes in escaping his people's fate, he actually becomes part of his people's fate. It's a classic hero tale. I understand the difference. I understand. But I'm saying, I don't want to say this is so different from Greek mythology. This is classic hero narrative stuff. This is the classic hero tale. Moshe has to go through trials, tribulations, and then comes out the other side, the deliverer of the people, the prophet of the God. Of course, our story is going to be different because we have a different point than the Greek stories are trying to make, but this is a classic hero tale from antiquity.
I just want to add a dimension.
Yep.
I think this is the evolution of God from Bereshit to Shemot, and that the name Batya, that he saw God or she saw God in the basket. So we begin to grow the relationship with God as we begin to create our mythology story.
Lovely.
Intertwined.
Lovely. Okay.
There's another connection with Bereshit. When it says that the boy was born, his mother, in English here, it says she saw how beautiful he was.
She says Tov.
I was just going to say, she says Ki Tov, how good, which is a reflection of what God said on all the days of creation. So there's a connection. And this, in a way, is the creation of the Jewish people.
Yes. All right. So two of my favorite books, or my favorite folks studying this stuff is Aviva Zornberg, of course. You know how I feel about Zornberg. My teacher of blessed memory, Tikva Freimer-Kensky, wrote Reading the Women of the Bible, a fabulous book that goes beyond the 5 books and talks about other women in Torah, a really good way to study the women of Torah. And then one of my favorite works on this part of Exodus, Moses, A Stranger Among Us by Maurice Harris, one of my absolute favorite books. And we don't have time. I know we're running out of time. Okay. All right. Anything from people at home that you want to say? We've been talking a lot in here. Any of y'all want to say anything? Lee, Hannah.
I'm really struck by the fact that this is a story about the actions of women, but at that sort of river crux point, it's also about the actions of specifically young women, like Miriam and Pharaoh's daughter. I'm imagining them as teenagers, and I feel like in our world, teenage girls get such crap, and it's so interesting to sort of look at the fate of the Jewish people in the hands of teenage girls who take really big, brave, responsible actions.
I love that. Lee. That's a really excellent point. That teenagers being, blah, 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 right, is all about our culture and all about what we want to put on them. And yes, they're those things. They're hormonally, it breaks their brains. Like they're dealing with broken brains. And they are also open to possibilities that we have aged out of, some of us, in terms of how we tend to see the world and what we're willing to do and risk and become and stand for. And the same things we criticize them for so much in our culture. I have a 19-year-old, so hold me with deep compassion. I get it. It can be very frustrating and very challenging. And that's kind of the point, right? Who's going to challenge the authority that isn't always so right or good or healthy or what needs to be happening, right? Something else needs to happen. I love that they're about possibility. The teenagers are about possibility. I love that. And about the chutzpah and about risking and about seeing things differently and about being open, to things that we think are crazy. I'm just going to say. All right. So Tikva Freimer-Kensky talks about this name Moshe, but we don't have time. So I'm going to give y'all these. Oh wow, Lee Sultan just added the women of Iran, all the young people of Iran, the women and young men in Iran, right? It's the young men who are about to hang and are hanging, right? That absolute courage of conviction. Okay. Tikva Freimer-Kensky from Reading the Women of the Bible. Pharaoh has a problem. Just as he took no heed of daughters, daughters take no heed of him. Meaning he said, let the daughters live. Who really cares? Right? He took no heed of the daughters. They don't mean anything. They're whatever. They're not a threat. So the daughters take no heed of him. Immediately, 2 daughters defy Pharaoh's command and act to preserve the life of a boy child. The Bible records the name of Moshe's mother, Yocheved, and his sister Miriam. And Midrash adds the name Bitya for the daughter of Paro, but none of them is named in this story. For like the anonymous daughters of the book of Judges, they are archetypal. They are daughters, women, the very ones overlooked by both Pharaoh and the tradition that remembered, she puts that dash there on purpose, that hyphen, who remembered the names of only the men who came to Egypt. 3 subversive daughters have foiled the plans of men and shaped the destiny of the world.
We just get
Can we, well, right? Mic drop, or as we say in Hartman, because it was a funny thing happened, good Shabbos, right? Okay, Baruch Hashem, good Shabbos. Shana Tova. So we have this wonderful quote from her. We have this wonderful quote from Maurice Harris. The seeding of a new era of history can happen in the brief moment it takes for a single person to have a change of heart. In that moment, when compassion stirs one person to the point of some small act of resistance to a system of evil, we witness an aspect of reality that no CEO, president, dictator, or supreme leader can eliminate from the human experience. Compassion's version of the butterfly effect. And I brought you, it's from 3 different pages in his book. I just had to put some more in here because I need it right now, and I need to preach it right now. So just bear with me. The success, and he has more than this, but I wanted to give you a taste. The success of the 1955 Montgomery bus boycott teaches us that we should organize and ready ourselves for those moments when the inevitable cracks in unjust power structures begin to rupture so that we can take advantage. The cracks are there. Preparation increases the odds that when light comes pouring through a small crack, people will be ready to widen the crack and let a wave of light rumble through. The story of Batya teaches something perhaps even more hopeful. So he's talking about folks who organize and then are ready, but he said, but the story of Batya teaches something perhaps even more hopeful. The impression we get from the text is that Batya, and he says more in his book about, was not agitating with and allying and having secret meetings with Hebrew women and forming coalitions, right? That's not what's happening. Had most likely lived well within the privileged bubble of the royal court. and that her decision to rescue the Hebrew baby was a purely spontaneous act of compassion. The implication is that even without an organizing effort by a committed resistance movement, the system can't prevent all the possible things that can happen to undermine its grip on power. There really is a crack, or more likely cracks, in everything, and some of the cracks are close to the center of power. Try to control every human heart to seal off the possibility of love weeding its way somehow to the surface. It's beyond any system's capacity for control. Let us pray. Let us hope. Let us, do what we need to do to soften our own hearts to be ready, to respond when there's a moment of possible chemla. And let us organize and let us have things in place so that when there's a possibility and there's an opportunity, we are ready to activate and motivate and 100% Martin Luther King weekend, that we're studying his Torah. Are you kidding? This is the Torah of Martin Luther King, right? Dr. King's, Reverend King's, this is his Torah. All right. And we'll close with Chaya Kaplan-Lester. Midrash Haggadol illustrates this idea beautifully in its weaving of a story of Pharaoh. We're going back to when we said Batya, of Shifra and Puah, God took note of them and made them houses. In its weaving, Pharaoh sends guards to capture the delinquent midwives. It says that God saves the women by turning them into the beams of a home. The guards search the house to no avail, for Shifra and Puah have become embedded in the house itself. They are the beams, the fortifying forces that uphold the entire structure. All the women who didn't make it, all the women who defied Pharaoh and paid with their lives so that we could enjoy the freedoms we have, all the women still there and to whom we owe a debt, we are bound to explore how to pay. They are the beams of this house. They are what supports it even as they fall and are destroyed. We are their sisters, their daughters, their offspring that they preserved and saved so that we could create the reality that would become redemption. Will we honor their sacrifices? That is the question. For all of those who have gone before, and when we talk about King and we talk about the successes, but of course, what Chaya, whatever Lester is pointing out is there are many who did not make it. In every situation of oppression, most even at the time don't make it. And so they are those who risked, those who were willing to sacrifice, those who were willing to have chemla and what that might mean and the courage to act on it. They are the pillars of this house. And it is we who get to create reality that for us is redemption. Let us create a society worthy of their efforts, their hope, their dreams, their sacrifices, and may we, in honor of all of those who have had vision, let us not lose hope that we too can, in this country and in the state of Israel, create a society that we would call one that is redeemed. Shabbat Shalom.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday morning Torah study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.